Known for his influence in Roman politics and his desire for Egyptian pleasure, Marcus Antonius rose to become the most powerful man in the world for nearly 15 years. As a young man, he associated himself with men like Clodius Pulcher and Scribonius Curio, who led him to lead a life of delinquency. In 57 BC, while he was living in Greece, Antonius was recruited as commander of the cavalry under the proconsul Gabinius in Syria. During this time, he assisted in putting down a rebellion in Judea and restoring Ptolemy XII to the throne in Egypt. As political tensions increased in Rome, Antonius became a supporter of Julius Caesar in Gaul. For his loyalty, Caesar supported Antonius in his elections to quaestor, augur, and plebeian tribune shortly before the Civil War. In the climactic Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, Caesar gave Antonius command of his left wing and won a decisive victory over Pompeius Magnus. After putting down the rest of his enemies in Libya and Hispania, Caesar returned to Rome and led the Republic as dictator, with Antonius as his consular partner. In 44 BC, the praetors Cassius Longinus and Marcus Brutus conspired to assassinate Caesar, and he was cut down in the Senate House on the Ides of March. Upon his death, Antonius rallied the Roman populace to his side as sole consul. But within the year, he was declared an enemy of the state thanks to the combined political power of Cicero and Gaius Octavius. Having fled Rome, he settled in Gallia Narbonensis and allied himself with Marcus Lepidus, the governor of the region. Though initially hesitant to take him in, Lepidus and his legions accepted Antonius and joined him on his march back into Italy. By late 43 BC, Octavius was ready to reconcile with Antonius, having separated from Cicero's influence. After a 3-day conference near the city of Bononia, the three men formed the Second Triumvirate and divided the Roman territories between them. In addition to issuing proscriptions for over 300 senators and equites, the stage was set for a third civil war that would determine the ultimate fate of the Roman Republic. With their affairs in order, Antonius and Octavius headed for Macedonia to deal with Brutus and Cassius and secure the eastern territories of Rome. In October 42 BC, the Battle of Philippi put an end to their rebellion, allowing Antonius to move into Asia. While operating from the city of Ephesus, he re-established Roman authority over the provinces and client kingdoms in the east. The most notable event of this time was his meeting with Cleopatra VII of Egypt in the province of Cilicia. According to Plutarch, Antonius was given over to his vices due to the allure of Cleopatra, and he lived a carefree life in Alexandria for some time until he was prompted to engage in more pressing matters. In Italy, Octavius waged a war with Fulvia, the wife of Antonius, which ended with her death and called for another reconciliation between the triumvirs. In Sicily, Sextus Pompeius had put Italy under siege with his warships, forcing the triumvirate to come to terms with him as well. After these events, Antonius turned his attention toward the Parthian Empire. Having sent his general, Publius Ventidius, to Syria ahead of him, the Romans had managed to hold the Parthians in Mesopotamia until the arrival of Antonius in 37 BC. For his campaign, he assembled a massive army drawn from multiple nations, including Armenia and Egypt. In 36 BC, Antonius led his forces into the Parthian territory and attempted to capture the northern city of Phraspa, the first step toward the Parthian capital of Ecbatana. However, poor resource management on his part led to disaster. Having left his siege equipment to be guarded by a small force, the Parthian army ambushed the Romans and destroyed everything. This military blunder forced Antonius to lift his siege of Fraspa and pull his army back toward Armenia. But the Parthians would not let him go peacefully. Until the Romans had safely retired into Syria, the Parthians would harass them day after day until they were all exterminated, just as they had done to Marcus Crassus years earlier. With each passing day, the strength of the Romans was being diminished by the relentless pursuit of the Parthians. For Antonius, it was imperative that his army reach the mountains of Armenia, for only then would the Parthians cease their attacks. In November 36 BC, the Romans finally crossed the Araxes River and escaped another disaster like that which had occurred at Carrhae nearly 20 years earlier. The loss of thousands of infantry and cavalry units had dealt a serious blow to the prestige of Antonius, but matters at home were not any easier. In Rome, Octavius had ousted Marcus Lepidus from the triumvirate after dealing with Pompeius in Sicily. At the same time, his sister Octavia was being deprived of her position as the wife of Antonius. This was because of Cleopatra's influence over Antonius, as she had managed to persuade him into acknowledging her children as his rightful heirs and the masters of the Roman territories in the east. By 32 BC, the triumvirate was finished. What followed was a war of propaganda between Antonius and Octavius to garner support for their inevitable clash at the town of Actium. In the meantime, the two men prepared their forces. According to Plutarch, Antonius gathered an army of over 100,000 infantry and cavalry from his allies in the east. In addition, he assembled nearly 800 ships, of which 200 belonged to Cleopatra alone. Though Antonius was initially hesitant at letting her take part in the war, she once again changed his mind to avoid a reconciliation with Octavia. Despite being numerically inferior, Octavius deemed his forces were sufficient. In late 32 BC, the Senate officially declared war against Cleopatra, while also depriving Antonius of his formal authority. They also confirmed Octavius to the position of consul, and he quickly took charge of the situation. By late summer 31 BC, the eyes of the world were focused on the town of Actium, as Antonius and Cleopatra prepared to fully engage Octavius in the final climactic war that would decide the fate of the Roman Republic. Before the battle, several key allies of Antonius went over to Octavius, a sign that his fortune was turning against him. Having decided on a naval engagement to settle the contest, the ships of both commanders formed up in the Ionian Sea. On September 2nd, 31 BC, the Battle of Actium commenced. The two forces were evenly matched for some time before Antonius sabotaged his own efforts. In the midst of the fighting, the Egyptian fleet sailed away in haste, causing him to chase after them and abandon the Romans. By nightfall, most of what remained of his forces had gone over to Octavius. Having left the battle in disgrace, Antonius spent some time in Libya before returning to Egypt and assisting Cleopatra in her preparations for the coming invasion of Rome. Attempts to negotiate for peace were futile, as Octavius was intent on gaining the riches of Egypt for his triumphal procession. After spending the winter in Samos, he led his legions through the Levant toward Alexandria. By July 30 BC, the great city was put under siege. Though Antonius initially won a small battle against Octavius, by early August, the remainder of his forces had deserted him. Having witnessed the betrayal of his soldiers and receiving news that Cleopatra was dead, Antonius attempted suicide with his own sword. When word reached him that she was still alive, he was brought to her secret chamber, where he spent his last moments with a woman he loved dearly. Despite his dying wish to trust Octavius with her life, Cleopatra determined to end it on her own terms. Upon his arrival, Octavius detained her children for several days before coming to meet with her and discuss the terms of surrender. Through her cleverness, Cleopatra deceived him into believing she intended to live. When the deception was realized, he sent his officers to stop her, but they were too late. The Queen of Egypt died on August 12th, 30 BC, by the poisonous bite of a snake, along with her 2 royal companions. As her final request, Octavius had her buried with Antonius in splendid fashion. With victory in Egypt secured, Octavius returned to Italy to oversee the transition of the Republic into an empire. He became the first man to lead the new nation, and was renamed Caesar Augustus. As the new head of state, his reign of 40 years began the 200-year-long period of Pax Romana. As for the descendants of Antonius, some would go on to rule the empire and have their names remembered for centuries, names such as Caligula, Claudius, and Nero.